Hello, I'm Ashley from Ashley's Pony Stable. Unlike a lot of the people watching this, I've only gotten into My Little Pony recently. Last year, in 2023, I binged through Friendship is Magic for the very first time, and it was quite the roller coaster ride. I'm so new to the show that I'm not particularly knowledgeable about it or its fanbase. I have watched and enjoyed it, but in that one watch through, a lot of it has washed over me. My aim is to become more knowledgeable about the show while seeing how much my opinions have changed over the past few months. I want to document this journey by reviewing each episode as I go. I'm going to rewatch each episode and then immediately write a paragraph of script detailing my thoughts. There are a lot of Friendship is Magic episodes, and I have a habit of not being able to shut up, so I've made the decision to split this project up by seasons to make it more manageable. As you can see from the length of this video, just getting through the first 26 episodes has taken a long time, so you can only imagine how much time it'll take to get through over 200. Before I get started, please consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to see the series continue. This video has been incredibly exhausting to make, and I've put countless hours into it at this point. I'm kind of recording this intro last, so your support would mean the world to me. I hope you enjoy the video. Okay, let's do this. Season 1, Episode 1 and 2, Friendship is Magic. As the 1000th yearly Summer Sun celebration approaches, nerdy student Twilight Sparkle worries that a story she read about the powerful owl called Nightmare Moon bringing about an eternal night will come true. Twilight's teacher, Celestia, instructs her to oversee the preparations for the Summer Sun celebrations and make new friends. But she finds this to be dismissive and plans to investigate the elements of harmony, the only known way of stopping Nightmare Moon instead. To Twilight's own dismay, the antics of the celebration organizers ends up distracting her from finding any information about the elements of harmony. Things go from bad to worse when Twilight's prediction is proven correct, and Nightmare Moon does come back. Twilight then reluctantly teams up with the celebration organizers Pinkie Pie, Rainbow Dash, Applejack, Rarity, and Fluttershy to find the elements of harmony and stop Nightmare Moon. I don't think anyone will be surprised to hear that I really like this as a beginning to the show. A good rule of thumb I like to stick to is that if something is focused on in the beginning of a show, it should be a sign that it'll be important throughout the entire show. Friendship is Magic excels at this because everything in these two episodes is foundational to the series at large. They introduce the key themes, characters, and lore very efficiently. I'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who's seen this episode and doesn't have a strong sense for who all the members of the main six are. I think one of the biggest reasons for this is the structure. Friendship is Magic, both the episode and the series as a whole have such a bulletproof structure to them. This two-parter doesn't just feel like one long episode with an obligatory cliffhanger in the middle, but instead, the episodes are separated by both a shift in narrative and aesthetic. The first part shows Twilight's initial meeting with each member of the main six going about their daily lives. We get to be introduced to them in the same way Twilight is, and have the same first impression of them that she does. What's smart about this is the second part simultaneously reinforces this by showing them act in similar ways in higher stakes situations, but also shows why Twilight's views of them are misguided. Fluttershy isn't just shy, she's kind. Rarity isn't just vain, she's generous. They systematically go through every character like this. We get their introduction in part 1, and then another scene focused on them in part 2. This could risk coming off as repetitive or formulaic, but it's the adherence to this formula that makes it work so well. If it wasn't for this repetition, the characters wouldn't feel so defined and memorable this quickly. In fact, it was Fluttershy's very first scene that already made her my favorite character of the main six in Friendship is Magic. Her silently staring at Twilight instead of actually introducing herself made me laugh a lot. Overall, it's a very good episode. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Season 1, Episode 3, the Ticketmaster. When Celestia sends Twilight 2 tickets to the Grand Galloping Gala, she struggles to decide which of her new friends to invite. This isn't helped when each of these friends try their hardest to convince her to invite them. This episode grew on me on this rewatch a lot, which is exactly why I wanted to do this project. On my first viewing, I found the episode to be surprisingly dry and predictable. There aren't many jokes here. Of course, a lot of the episodes in this children's cartoon are predictable to me, but it's possible to be predictable in good ways and bad ways. This one was one of the latter on my first viewing, but I'm starting to come around to it. On this rewatch, I noticed a few clever ideas at play here. The episode doubles down on the structure I praised in the premiere episode. We get to take turns seeing how the main six all react differently to the same event. We learn their very different reasons for wanting to go to the gala, and see how they attempt to persuade Twilight. Nothing about this is groundbreaking. In fact, I think it's the main thing that makes the episode feel so predictable and repetitive. However, I understand why the creators of the show would want to make sure beyond any reasonable doubt that everyone has a solid understanding of each main character this early on. I actually really like the dilemma of feeling like you really want to impress every pony, but not being able to. The ending of Celestia giving Twilight enough tickets may seem like a cop-out, but I actually think it fits the moral of the episode very well. The problem was that Twilight felt solely responsible for every pony else's happiness, which is then solved by someone else helping her. Twilight's character arc throughout the early seasons is supposed to be about her going from being an isolated loner to becoming a really good friend. So learning to rely on other people instead of expecting to solve everything herself is an important step towards that. I'd give this episode a 7 out of 10. Season 1, Episode 4, Applebuck Season. After Big Macintosh sustains an injury, Applejack takes it upon herself to buck every single apple tree in the Apple family orchard by herself. And that's it. The episode being simple isn't a bad thing by itself, but there really isn't much here to cling on to. At the beginning of the episode, Big Mac outwardly tells Applejack that it's far too much work for one pony, and the rest of the episode plays out exactly like you'd expect it to. Side note, Big Mac talks in this one, like a lot. Yeah, I actually have a vague memory of being surprised later on at learning he wasn't going to talk much throughout the show just because of how talkative he is here. It doesn't really matter, I just thought it was worth pointing out. The structure that made the first episode so good is starting to drag things down a bit now by this point. Between bucking all the apple trees, Applejack tries to help out all of her friends one by one. It's the 4th episode now, and every single one so far has had Rainbow Dash once again state that her main motivation is impressing the Wonderbolts. I get it already. I guess you could argue that some of the characters feeling a little flat in one note here could be counted as good writing, since they do generally get more layered and interesting throughout the next couple of seasons, so that's something I guess. The biggest saving grace of this episode is that it's funnier than I remembered it was. There are a lot more jokes than the previous episodes, and some of them land really well. I got a really big chuckle when Twilight used her magic to pick a comical amount of apples in one go. I'm thinking a 6 out of 10 for this one, which is by no means a negative score. I just know for a fact that Friendship is Magic has far more potential than this. Season 1, Episode 5, The Griffin Brush Off. Rainbow Dash introduces Pinkie Pie to one of her other friends, Gilda the Griffin. Pinkie is bullied by Gilda, who insists she's above all the other ponies and likes to play cruel pranks on them. Pinkie Pie decides to throw a party where Gilda gets pranked relentlessly. She explodes in anger at Pinkie Pie, only to find out that Rainbow Dash was the one who set up the pranks and meant them in a light-hearted way. I've said multiple times before on this channel, and even in this video, that I watched Friendship is Magic for the first time in 2023, but that's not 100% true. In December of 2022, I actually did watch these first 5 episodes and fell off of it. I didn't decide to drop the show. I just didn't get around to continuing it until around the early summer of 2023, where I began to pick it up from the beginning again. I don't want to say that this episode leaving such a bad taste in my mouth was responsible for it, but yeah, I don't really like this episode very much. The worst part is I'm finding it difficult to explain exactly why that is. I could easily say that Gilda was annoying and the episode felt a little mean-spirited, but isn't that the point? Later episodes like the one with Babseed deals with an extremely similar subject matter but in a far less grating way, but I struggle to put my hoof on why. I'll likely come back to this point when I get to that episode. As for things the episode did well, I like that we're finally shedding the formula of giving every member of the main six their own section of the episode, and it's nice to see Rainbow Dash be given any interest outside of just mentioning the Wonderbolts at every turn. I think the real issue is I don't really care for any of the individual elements that make up the episode. Has any cartoon done a particularly good prank war episode? I think maybe Regular Show had a good one, but it's definitely one of the weaker cartoon episode tropes in my opinion. I'm sorry to say, but this is a 4 out of 10 to me. I feel the need to reassure all of you that I do love the show. It's just that this early run of episodes is a little bit weak. Hopefully the next episode is better. Season 1, Episode 6, Ghostbusters. Every pony in Ponyville finds the newest resident, the great and powerful Trixie, to be very annoying and boastful. However, Twilight is reluctant to stand up to Trixie because she's worried her friends will accuse her of also just being a show-off. Now this is far more like it. We get the introduction of one of the most memorable characters in the entire show, a very worthwhile moral, and just a fun episode all around. I really like the dilemma of Twilight wanting to use her magic to help her friends, but worrying that she'll be viewed as showing off. I could absolutely see this being something that a lot of children watching the show struggle with, so it's cool to see the episode take such an empathetic angle with it. Near the beginning of the episode, we see Applejack, Rainbow Dash, and Rarity each try to outshine Trixie, and it serves the episode really well. It helps establish the kind of character Trixie really is, with all of her rebuttals being really mean-spirited. It also hammers home just how reluctant Twilight is here, because she gets so many attempts to intervene. I think that this episode used Spike really well here too. He comes across as really likable, and I always like whenever he stands up for Twilight. While season 1 overall feels a little weaker than the couple episodes that immediately follow it, there are plenty of good episodes and this is one of them. I give Ghostbusters an 8 out of 10. Season 1, Episode 7, Dragonshy. Princess Celestia gives the main six the task of stopping smoke from polluting Ponyville. They go on a quest up a nearby mountain to confront the cause of it, a napping dragon. However, Fluttershy's fear of fully grown dragons leaves her halting the group's progress. I had already been giving these episodes numerical ratings on my first watch through via the app I'd been using to track my progress through the show. Fluttershy Fluttershy is my favourite member of the main six in Friendship is Magic, so I ended up giving almost every episode focused on her a 9 or a 10 out of 10. Because of that, it was pretty funny to watch this episode again. It was pretty good, I had a fun enough time with it, but then I saw my original rating was a 9. I don't want to get too hung up on numerical ratings. The only reason I mention them throughout the video is to give you a very quick idea of what my overall thoughts on an episode is. I worry that there will be episodes that are really good, but I get hung up on and talk about one of my flaws with it for too long and give you the impression I disliked an episode more than I actually did. So the score is there to help balance that out. The episode is great, but it's just funny to see how high that score was. I think that's one of the biggest indictments of how slow the first season is, that my standards were low enough to warrant giving this a 9 even though it just feels a bit plain. I think that's my biggest problem with the first half of season 1 in general. A lot of these episodes are good, but I can certainly feel that the show is a little ways away from hitting its stride. Nowadays I'd give this episode a 7 out of 10. I like Fluttershy enough that the episode being a little plain isn't enough to deter me from giving it a high rating. Season 1, Episode 8, Look Before You Sleep. When Applejack and Rarity are caught outside during a dangerous thunderstorm, Twilight invites them to stay at her house until it blows over. Twilight then gets the idea to turn this opportunity into a sleepover. But things don't go as planned when Applejack and Rarity can't stop getting into petty arguments. I'm gonna come right out and say it, this is an absolutely fantastic episode. First of all, I love whenever a Friendship is Magic episode focuses primarily on two characters and the dynamic between them. It's one of the things that make the main six feel like a believable friend group to me. They don't just all feel like they're friends with Twilight individually, but instead have friendships with each other too. This may sound funny to say considering that the episode is all about the ways that Applejack and Rarity don't get along, but I think that part works really well too. The characters throughout this show aren't just blandly agreeable towards each other, they have their differences, they fight and make up. This works especially well in the early episodes of the show because it really gives you the feeling that Applejack and Rarity are new to being friends with each other and haven't figured out how it's going to work yet. Giving them an episode that acknowledges just how different they are, but having them agree to try to get along anyways, does wonders for not only just these two characters, but the show as a whole. This is an easy 9 out of 10 for me, and it's one of the first episodes to show the series' full potential. Season 1, Episode 9, Bridal Gossip. A zebra named Zecora visits Ponyville, and all the residents spread rumors behind her back about how she's a bad person who creates curses. Twilight is initially skeptical of said rumors, but suddenly starts to believe it when she and the rest of the main six wake up the next day with unusual body defects. They try to confront Zecora and force her to undo the curse, who laughs it off and explains that they stepped in a patch of poison jolks, a plant that specializes in spreading ironic illnesses. Out of all of the episodes from season 1, this was one of the 2 that I was dreading to revisit the most. I think it's fair to say that Friendship is Magic's depiction of other cultures isn't the best. I'm not the person who should be discussing the nuances of Zecora's depiction, but there's a lot about her, especially in this episode, that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's a difficult topic to broach because I do like Zecora as a character in isolation. I think it's the way that she's treated that's the problem. The episode certainly means well with its message of not judging a book by its cover, but I think it missed the mark a little in that regard. Fortunately, there's still quite a lot I like here. I like Apple Bloom's inclusion, despite it feeling strange for it to get so much attention in an episode before the one about the forming of the Cutie Mark Crusaders. The reason I like her inclusion is because it leans into the idea that racism is a learned trait, not one you're born with. Children tend to be too naive to understand racism, so her being the voice of reason worked really well here. Another thing I kinda love here is the comedy. The so-called curse is easily one of the funniest things to happen in the show up until this point. Fluttershy's comically deep voice is absolutely hilarious, and I really appreciate them getting a different actor to do it rather than just artificially pitching her usual voice down. I'm going to give this episode a 5 out of 10, because I really love half of this episode, and I think the other half hasn't aged particularly well. Season 1, Episode 10, Swarm of the Century. Celestia announces that she plans to visit Ponyville, so Twilight takes it upon herself to set up an event to welcome her. Things go wrong when Fluttershy brings a Parasprite into town, and it starts reproducing until the swarm of them have overrun the place. The main six all attempt to contain the swarm before Celestia arrives, to varying degrees of success. Up until this point, I had remembered each episode very strongly even before rewatching it, but this is the first episode where I realized I'd forgotten most of it, which is a shame because the episode's really solid. I like that this episode serves the purpose of showing how much the characters have grown throughout the first 10 episodes, and that they've still got a lot of room left to grow. We see Twilight oversee the organization of a royal event, which then gets disrupted and she attempts to fix it. This is a formula that we get to see repeated quite a lot throughout the show, and its use here is really well done. Just like in The Ticketmaster, I like that the show is reinforcing that Twilight can't just do everything alone. She needs to rely on the help of her friends. This episode takes a slightly different angle on that idea because she has to trust in Pinkie Pie despite not knowing what her plan even is. I will concede that Pinkie Pie not revealing her plan until the very last second is a little bit contrived, but it's also in character for her, so I'd say the problem cancels itself out. I really like Twilight's meeting with Celestia a lot, where Twilight tells Celestia what she's learned so far, and Celestia says that she's going to delay her visit to Ponyville. She gives a different reason for why she's delaying her visit, but I'd like to think the real reason is because she knows exactly what's happening and thinks Twilight isn't quite ready yet. Regardless of the actual reason, we now have a second upcoming event alongside the previously mentioned Grand Galloping Gala to look forward to in an upcoming episode. This was a lot of fun, 7 out of 10. Okay, that's 10 episodes down, only 211 to go, yay. Season 1, Episode 11, Winter Wrap-Up. As winter ends, the citizens of Ponyville prepare the town for the quickly approaching spring. Twilight wants to participate, but finds it difficult to help while abiding by the rule that disallows the use of magic. We made it to the first song! This episode truly feels like a milestone in a lot of ways. I always thought it was strange that it took the show this long to start having the songs, but on this rewatch I actually think I prefer it. Every pony knows that Ingram's songs are amazing, so the more of them the better, but it also makes the episode feel so much more important. It's not even just a song, it's a proper musical number. They give it a lot of the episode's screen time by having a lengthy performance at the beginning of the episode, and they have an instrumental version played with no dialogue over it near the end. They know that the song is important to the episode, so they give it all the time and respect it needs. I wouldn't even say it's just the song either. Notice how I've mentioned that a lot of episodes up until this point have felt plain? To me, this is the exact moment the show starts to hit its stride and shake away its growing pains of early season 1. There are still a few episodes after this that I don't care for very much, but I'd go as far as to say that the next 2.5 seasons are peak Friendship is Magic. It's early enough in the show that the characters still have plenty of potential and room to grow. The show has hit this perfect mesh of being heartfelt and sincere without any cynicism. Twilight's arc in this episode hits different on a rewatch too. Knowing the direction the show heads in later makes this episode feel like one of the most important ones for her in hindsight. Seeing her realize that her special skill isn't doing ground level work with every pony else, but instead taking a leadership role. Even I can't help but get a little sentimental, remembering that this is where all of that started. I originally gave this episode a 9 out of 10, but who are we kidding? That's a 10. Season 1, Episode 12, Call of the Cutie. Applejack's sister, Applebloom, believes she is the only one in her class without a cutie mark. When she's mockingly invited by Diamond Tiara to attend her quinceañera, a party celebrating her newfound cutie mark, she tries to find a way to gain a cutie mark of her own before the party starts. I'm honestly surprised this episode didn't happen sooner. I feel like the more important something is to a show as a whole, the sooner it should be introduced. Meaning that when this episode happened so far through the first season, it made me assume that the Cutie Mark Crusaders, and Applebloom, would get far less focus throughout the show than they actually did. In some ways, it honestly feels like Applebloom is something of a secondary protagonist to the show. If you took all the episodes focused on the Cutie Mark Crusaders and watched them in a row, it would probably make up a lengthy and coherent show all of its own. I like the Cutie Mark Crusaders enough. They're certainly not my favourite characters, but I never particularly find myself getting disappointed when an episode turns out to be about them. As a setup episode for a plotline we're going to see a lot throughout the rest of the show, this managed to hit all the bases I'd want it to. It feels like very efficient storytelling, where everything serves a purpose, but without any bells or whistles to actually make the episode stand out, other than its importance to the series as a whole. Applebloom obviously doesn't get a cutie mark in this episode, and I like how that ties into the moral of the episode, about how the parts of yourself that you're self-conscious about could actually be a strength, with it being how she befriends the other two Crusaders. This episode is a solid 7 out of 10 to me. It's fun, and there isn't really anything wrong with it, but I can't imagine this being at the top of my list when I'm in the mood to throw on a random episode. Season 1, Episode 13, Fall Weather Friends. When Applejack beats Rainbow Dash in a horseshoe throwing game, the two mares agree to take part in an Iron Pony competition to see who's the best overall at physical activities. Rainbow Dash wins, but Applejack accuses her of cheating by relying too heavily on using her wings. So the two decide to settle the score by taking part in the annual Running of the Leaves race. This is another great episode for establishing a dynamic between two of the main six. Funnily enough, it's another one about Applejack getting into arguments with some pony else. A lot of my thoughts about Look Before You Sleep apply here too, however I will say I enjoyed this one a little bit less, because I found Rarity and Applejack's conflicting worldviews far more interesting than Rainbow Dash and Applejack's competitiveness. That's just a subjective thought though, which I cannot stress enough is what the entire video is made up of. I'm discussing my feelings on each episode. I do not find arguing the supposed objective quality of any show to be interesting, and would rather give my honest, sincere thoughts and try to bank those up instead. The episode as a whole is very entertaining. I really liked seeing the stakes escalate from a horseshoe game that they play on a whim, all the way to competing in what seems to be the Equestria equivalent of a marathon. I liked Twilight's inclusion here, and her message of it being more important to focus on what you're doing rather than being distracted by your opponent. The twist of Rainbow Dash and Applejack coming in last and being beaten by Twilight, who came in 5th, was really good too. Celestia just appearing at the end of the episode really caught me off guard. I mentioned in Swarm of the Century that Celestia postponed her trip to Ponyville, and I remember the upcoming episode where she does come back to visit, but I completely forgot this one. It kind of deflates the importance of that episode a little, and it feels like it doesn't add much to this specific episode either. Tangent aside, I'd still give this episode an 8 out of 10. Season 1, Episode 14, Suited for Success. Rarity offers to make dresses for the main 6 to wear at the Grand Galloping Gala, but when the dresses don't turn out how they hoped, Rarity remakes them to be more accurate to their vision. The new dresses turn out horribly, and Rarity gets embarrassed during a fashion show, forcing the main 6 to realize that being so picky was the cause of it. I mentioned that Winter Wrap-Up felt like a turning point where the show really started to hit its stride, but on my first watch through, this was the episode that got me hooked and made me want to see it through to the end. I, as you may have guessed, am an artist. All of the hand-drawn assets you've seen throughout my videos were designed and drawn by me. It's one of the many reasons this video is taking so long to release. Being an artist, I have a lot of thoughts on this episode and can relate a lot to Rarity here. I think it's pretty obvious that this episode is supposed to be an allegory for how artists are treated in general. I've seen a lot of people complain that the main 6 come across as mean-spirited by being overly picky, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. First of all, this really does happen. A lot. If you think it's out of character for Rarity's friends to be this particular about the designs of the dresses, then you probably aren't an artist who's made anything for their friends before. This isn't supposed to be some kind of vague call-out post to anyone I know, I'm just saying the main 6's reactions are believable to me. An important thing that stuck out to me on this rewatch is that the main 6 never demand Rarity to remake the dresses. Rarity does it on her own anyway because she can tell they were disappointed with them. I don't even really think the main 6 thought the dresses were ever bad necessarily. This is just another thing that happens a lot in art. When they were told that Rarity was making dresses for them, they probably had a picture in their head of exactly what they wanted them to look like, and had a sudden knee-jerk reaction to them being different. This happens all the time. It's not something to feel bad about either, everyone does it. Instead, it's important to try to listen to these artists, learn more about why they made the decisions they did make, and give it an honest shot. If you still don't like whatever's being offered to you, then that's okay. The important takeaway from this episode, to me at least, is that artists tend to be more educated in their field than you are, and it's a good thing to at least hear them out and be open to changing your mind. In that regard, I like that the episode showed Rarity learning that she needs to stand up for herself if she thinks her dresses are good and stop being a pushover. This is why it's more interesting, not less, that she's the one who decided to redo the dresses. It's easy as an artist to overthink what everyone's reaction to your work will be, which will leave you second guessing yourself, and your lack of confidence will show in the finished work. Another thing I love about this episode is, of course, the song. Not only is it honestly one of the best songs in the show, but I love that the story is being told via the song. We don't just stop the episode for a couple of minutes so that we can insert the song. I've noticed that going back to listen to the song again on its own is a bit annoying because there's so many parts where the characters are talking over it. But I'd argue this shows a priority of servicing the episode as a whole over being a good song in a vacuum, which is a very good thing. This one's gotta be a 10 out of 10, right? I tried to give out perfect scores sparingly, but this episode's and its handling of this specific subject matter really stuck with me, and I think about it a lot. Are we witnessing Rarity overtaking Fluttershy as my favourite member of the main 6 in Friendship is Magic in real time? I'm open to it. While I'm not sure yet, she definitely gets the best episodes in Season 1. Season 1, Episode 15, Feeling Pinkie Keen. When Twilight learns that Pinkie Pie has the ability to predict events immediately before they happen, she tries to disprove it and find a rational explanation. She becomes distressed as every piece of evidence she finds points towards the idea of the ability not only being real, but very unexplainable. On the surface, it feels like this episode's just trying to be entertaining and fluffy, but I do enjoy the dynamic between the logical Twilight and the nonsensical Pinkie Pie. There being no revealed explanation for Pinkie Pie's sensing ability is also pretty funny. I like the moral that just because you can't understand something doesn't mean it isn't possible. While I do agree that you should think for yourself and use your own judgment, there are a lot of ideas and concepts that children should be taught about, but they may not be able to wrap their minds around. The surprise cameo from Celestia at the end of the episode is one of the highlights for the show so far. It completely caught me off guard. The episode is really simple, I don't have much to say about it. It's a pretty self-explanatory, funny Pinkie Pie episode. 7 out of 10, I enjoyed it. Season 1, Episode 16, Sonic Rainboom. Rainbow Dash enters a flying competition in Cloudsdale, but worries she'll lose when she can't seem to pull off her signature move, the Sonic Rainboom, in practice. The main 6 want to be there to cheer for her, but non-Pegasi can't go to Cloudsdale due to not being able to step on clouds. Twilight uses a spell to give Rarity rings, followed by a spell on the rest of the main 6, allowing them to step on clouds. Rarity's wings start to give her an ego and she decides to enter the competition too, making Rainbow Dash's nerves even worse. My thoughts are a little all over the place with this one. I'd say it's a good episode overall, but something just seems off about it. I think it could be the writing feels a little clunkier than usual. For example, Rainbow Dash runs into some bullies who mockingly call her Rainbow Crash early in the episode. We then get a scene afterwards where Rainbow Dash shows the main 6 where the weather is made in Cloudsdale, and the only purpose the scene serves is to have Rainbow Dash run into the same bullies and get mocked again in the same way. I don't see why these scenes couldn't have just been combined into one. The inclusion of the weather factory feels so odd here too. I think it's a really cool concept, I just think it could have been better served in an episode where the factory itself is important to the story. Another example of slightly clunky writing is that in order to get into Cloudsdale, Twilight uses a spell on Rarity to give her temporary rings, but then just uses a cloud walking spell on everyone else. She gives the excuse of realizing that there was an easier spell immediately after using the wing spell, but it comes across as inelegant writing to me. I think it could have worked better if she did just go through with giving every pony wings, and Rarity was the only one of them to get the ego, while the others didn't care so much. I think this would make the conflict far more character focused, since Rarity's personality drives her actions more and really separates her from the rest of the main 6, while leaving room for some jokes about Applejack being terrible at using the wings she's gained. I'm realizing that I'm essentially just nitpicking here, and I'm willing to admit that. The episode's still an enjoyable 6 out of 10. Season 1, Episode 17, Stairmaster. Sweetie Belle uses up the last of Rarity's gold silk to make capes for the Cutie Mark Crusaders. This causes Rarity to fall behind on order, so Fluttershy offers to look after the Crusaders for the night. Fluttershy doesn't realize how much of a handful the Crusaders can be, and to make matters worse, they sneak out of the house when they're supposed to be sleeping. I honestly think the Cutie Mark Crusaders should have worn these capes more often. They look really cute in them. That doesn't really have much to do with the quality of the episode, I just felt like it needed to be said. This is the second episode about the Cutie Mark Crusaders, and the first where we get to see all 3 members interact for an extended amount of time, and I think they pulled it off well. Just like with the main 6, I like that they're not just a plainly agreeable friend group. It makes for a more interesting group of characters, and throwing Fluttershy into the mix was really smart too. The imbalanced power dynamic of the one shy adult looking after 3 rowdy children is fun to watch, but it never outstayed its welcome. It feels very efficient, because it means Fluttershy can develop, and we can learn more about the Crusaders in the same episode, rather than splitting it into 2. The encounter with the cockatrice feels very slight, however. It feels like it could be a byproduct of the writing being maybe a bit too efficient. Fluttershy dealing with the cockatrice is what the entire episode is named after, yet it gets glossed over so quickly. Despite my minor gripes with the execution, the premise is just too good to not enjoy. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Season 1, Episode 18, The Showstoppers. The Cutie Mark Crusaders attempt to earn their cutie marks, but fail. Applejack gives them her old rundown treehouse, they fix it, and there's an extended montage of them trying out new hobbies to try to earn a cutie mark. Shirley tells them there's going to be a talent show, they enter and do so badly they win a medal for Best Comedy Act. If this episode's recap felt like a list of disconnected things happening, that's because it was. I don't want to sound like a blind hater of the Cutie Mark Crusaders. I like them and a lot of their episodes. This one just feels so unfocused and repetitive that it blends in with all the others. I think it could have worked a lot better to just take one aspect of the episode and focus on that. How about making fixing the treehouse the thing the entire episode is about? The Crusaders could have attempted to fix it on their own and turn down Applejack's help, but be so embarrassed by their failure to rebuild it that they're reluctant to ask for help. This could lead to an interesting dilemma where Apple Bloom needs to overcome her pride and fixation on earning a cutie mark and ask her sister for help. Then they could be rewarded for this by ending the episode with the fully renovated Crusader clubhouse. Instead, in the actual episode, they just build it with very little roadblocks or drama, which is really strange for an episode where the Crusaders are worried they aren't able to find their talents. The overly long montage and talent show don't really do much for me either, especially since the supposed message of the episode is about how you should focus on the hobbies you already enjoy rather than doing things out of obligation. I like the moral, but the Crusaders absolutely do not learn it. Almost every single Cutie Mark Crusader after this one happens because they ignored this advice. Characters don't have to learn the lesson at the end of the episode, but it does make the episode feel like a waste of time in hindsight. There's no character development here really. The jokes aren't even particularly funny either. There aren't that many entertaining character interactions, and Twilight commits the cardinal sin of saying My Little Pony 2 separate times in the same episode. You can say it every once in a while, but if you overuse it, it'll become corny too fast. It may sound like I'm being worked up over the episode being bad, but it's honestly not. I'd give it a 5 out of 10 because it's just very forgettable. There's no reason to rewatch this episode over the one that came immediately before it. Season 1, Episode 19, A Dog and Pony Show. Rarity receives an outfit order from the famous musician Sapphire Shores. Unfortunately, she's running too low on gems to create the outfits that have been ordered, so she teams up with Spike to collect more. While out gathering jewels, Rarity is noticed by the Diamond Dogs, who attempt to kidnap and coerce her into using her magic to help them gather gems of their own. Spike enlists the help of the rest of the main 6 to save Rarity. Over the course of making this video, I've worried that I've come across as too analytical and given the impression that I can't just shut up and enjoy a fun episode. This worry eventually manifested into me actually kind of believing it. So this episode really swooped in at the perfect time to save me from that. This is very much a silly comedy episode, but it's the best kind of silly comedy episode. It's got a good premise, a fantastic message, and so many jokes that hit their mark. The episode just flies by, never sitting on one thing for too long. I think that's something that should be talked about more, to be honest. Most other similar cartoons have such short runtimes, usually 11 minutes per episode, and now with the advent of digital streaming, even less. So Friendship is Magic's ability to have such comedy-focused episodes that are well-paced over 22 minutes is genuinely impressive. Everything revolving around Rarity not cooperating with the Diamond Dogs is absolutely hilarious to me. From her not wanting to chip a hoof digging, to her whining on purpose to annoy them, and the episode ending the only way it possibly could have, the Diamond Dogs getting so tired of her that they just kick her out anyway. The general idea has undoubtedly been done a lot of times in the past, but Friendship is Magic easily has the best execution of it with this episode. And a lot of that is definitely owed to Rarity's voice actress, Tabitha St. Germain, who does a fantastic job not only here, but throughout the entire show. Oh, and the moral. At the end of the episode, Twilight points out that Rarity managing to handle herself against the Diamond Dogs proved that femininity isn't a weakness. You can be ladylike and still be able to hold your own. In a show primarily aimed at girls itself, I think that this is the kind of thing the audience needs to hear frequently. Femininity is often depicted or taught to be a weakness, and if you want to get stronger, you need to give that side of yourself up. Now I know this is just a kid's cartoon, but seeing that point get overtly refuted, even in a comedic context, meant a lot to me. Am I talking myself into giving this episode a 9 out of 10? Yeah, I think I am. I really like this one. Season 1, Episode 20, Green Isn't Your Color. Rarity books a photo shoot with Photo Finish, a popular fashion photographer. She asks Fluttershy to model her outfits for the photo shoot, who reluctantly agrees because she wants to help her friend. Fluttershy does too good a job of modeling because it causes Photo Finish to no longer care about Rarity's fashion and instead focus on making Fluttershy the next big celebrity. Wow, it's a Fluttershy and Rarity focused episode. I bet Ashley loved this one. This is proof that I'm not trying to be a contrarian, because yes, I loved this one. It's not just that this episode is centered around two of my favorite characters, although that certainly does help, but rather that the episode itself is so expertly constructed. This one has so many moving pieces in its plot, yet remains so efficient. Fluttershy not wanting to model, but continuing to do so because Rarity tells her to, is a really good motivation for her. But it only gets better when we see Rarity admit that she secretly hates that Fluttershy is succeeding and wants her to fail. This moment may seem incredibly mean-spirited, but I think it adds a lot to this episode. Rarity isn't just being heartless. Despite being jealous of Fluttershy, she still encourages her when she's around, and only vents these feelings behind her back. These may be unhealthy feelings to have, but characters having flaws is precisely what makes them interesting. Fluttershy messes up a fashion show on purpose to get out of modeling, but when the crowd turns on her, an unknowing Rarity stands up for Fluttershy and turns everyone's opinion back again. I'm not usually the biggest fan of plot lines built on an easy to solve misunderstanding, but it's worth it to get to this moment where Rarity grows as a character. Despite already admitting to herself that she's jealous, she saves her friend anyway. If Rarity wasn't flawed, then this conflict would be non-existent, so I really hate whenever people complain that the main six aren't a good friend group or whatever. Twilight finds out that neither Rarity or Fluttershy are happy with the situation, but can't tell them because she promises both of them not to spill their secrets. This makes for a pretty funny ongoing joke throughout the episode, where she keeps wanting to tell them but has to interrupt herself each time. Not only is it entertaining, but it puts Twilight in a new situation. We've seen her get caught in the middle of arguments before, but this is a more refreshing angle to take with it. This is easily a second 9 out of 10 in a row. Actually, no, who am I kidding? You all heard how excited I got about this episode. It's the third 10 out of 10. Are you enjoying how predictable my tastes are? Season 1, Episode 21, Over a Barrel. The main six try to deliver an apple tree to the town of Appaloosa, but are stopped by a group of buffalo who steal it and explain that the land the town was built on was stolen from them. The main six attempt to form a truce between the ponies living in Appaloosa and the buffalo. I didn't have enough time to draw a teeth-gritted version of myself to use in this video, so just pretend that I'm using it here. Earlier I mentioned that there were 2 episodes in this season that I dreaded talking about, and this is the other one. It's extremely obvious in the episode, but I should point it out here so that everyone's on the same page. The buffalo are an allegory for Native Americans, and Appaloosa represents the land and oil they owned. I recently watched Martin Scorsese's new film Killers of the Flower Moon. It's an absolutely incredible yet haunting retelling of the real-life events that happened to a group of Osage people. I'm not going to sugarcoat my words when I say that going from that very compassionate and empathetic movie to this children's cartoon episode was embarrassing. I don't necessarily think that a children's cartoon shouldn't be allowed to broach this topic. However, there's a difference between naive optimism and just straight up lying. If you couldn't guess, this episode obviously ends with the 2 factions agreeing to share their land and resources. This is honestly unacceptable, considering what the episode is an allegory for. I know I should try my hardest to defend my opinion as much as possible when it's going to be one as divisive as this one. But I also know that I am not in a position to delve into the nuances of how everything here is wrong. This might be the biggest gap of quality between 2 consecutive episodes we'll see throughout the entire show. The previous episode was a 10, while this one is closer to a 2. The Fluttershy wanting to be a tree joke was probably the only redeeming feature here. Season 1, Episode 22. A Bird in a Hoof. An event is held to celebrate Celestia visiting Ponyville, for real this time. During the party, Fluttershy is introduced to Celestia's pet phoenix, Philomena. Fluttershy assumes that the bird is feeling unwell, so takes it in an attempt to nurse it back to health, and then give it back without anyone noticing. Things don't go to plan when every pony notices the bird's disappearance, and none of Fluttershy's methods seem to work. And we're back! I'm more than happy to move on from that sudden drop in quality so quickly. This is such a fun episode. I mentioned at some point near the beginning of this video that there's a bad kind of predictable and a good kind. This episode is the good kind of predictable. Yes, I was able to predict pretty much everything that was about to happen in this episode just from the first few minutes. Yet I found myself thoroughly entertained regardless. I think the star of the episode is Philomena the Phoenix. The bird just has such a funny design and fantastic comedic timing. The reveal that it was just messing with Fluttershy and never actually got hurt added an extra layer of comedy to an already very funny episode. Celestia has felt like an overwhelming presence throughout the duration of this season so far, but this is the episode that finally gives us a really good feel for her as a character. I really like how playful she's willing to be, especially when she's around people who assume they need to be on their best behavior. I think this extends to making Twilight more interesting too, since her own self-serious mannerisms contrast well against her teacher. It's a very good twist on the serious teacher, less mature student trope. This episode is the kind of thing I really like to see from Friendship is Magic. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Season 1, Episode 23. The Cutie Mark Chronicles. Each member of the main 6 tells the Cutie Mark Crusaders the story of how they earned their Cutie Mark. Sometimes the simplest ideas really are the best ones. My problem with anthology episodes is that there's usually at least one story out of the bunch that's worse than the others and brings the whole experience down with it. But every single story here is absolutely perfect. A lot of the most well-remembered aspects of the show originate from this episode, like Pinkie Pie's Amish family and Scootaloo's sister-like relationship with Rainbow Dash. The backstories balance the difficult task of all making perfect sense and shaping who the characters became as they grew up, whilst also having the thematic tie-in of being connected by Rainbow Dash's sonic rain boom. Whilst I like Twilight as a protagonist, I absolutely love the decision to have every pony's backstory be connected to Rainbow Dash instead. It can get annoying to me when a series has such a big main cast, but the sole protagonist is the only character that's allowed to participate in such important moments. So putting Rainbow Dash front and center here works astonishingly well. Even better, the sonic rain boom that causes every pony's Cutie Mark awakening happens because Rainbow Dash was attempting to help protect Fluttershy from a group of bullies. It's an act of friendship that causes each member of the main 6 to earn their Cutie Mark. You can argue that every member of the main 6 getting their mark at the same time feels contrived, but I couldn't disagree more. The message of your actions inspiring other people without you even realizing it, and that those people could end up becoming your future friends, is so sweet and sentimental that I can't help but love it. This is exactly what I like so much about My Little Pony. There's a level of sincerity at play in these early seasons that really pull everything together. It allows itself to get a little emotionally vulnerable instead of trying too hard to look cool. This is the key to the franchise's success. The lack of any unwarranted cynicism or self-awareness. This is not only a 10, but it's the easiest 10 I've given out so far. While watching the episode, I became a little worried about how I'd only just started the show and had already given out perfect scores to 4 different episodes. Funny, right? How it wasn't that long ago that I worried I was being too critical of the show, but now I'm being too generous? What can I say? I really do enjoy the show a lot, and I'd rather give away too many perfect scores than lie to myself. Season 1, Episode 24. Owl's Well That Ends Well. Spike is so busy helping Twilight as her assistant that he passes out due to exhaustion. He wakes up to find out that Twilight has recruited a new pet owl, Owlicious, to be her new assistant. In a fit of jealousy, Spike tries to prove that he's the better assistant than the owl. This is the first Spike-focused episode, and whilst I'm not too familiar with the fandom, I know that the character and his episodes are fairly divisive. I like Spike a lot, actually. I find him to be very charming and earnest. The problem is that I unfortunately agree that a lot of the episodes centered around him just aren't that interesting to me. I think a lot of the individual pieces here have the potential to work. Spike having a rival he needs to outperform for Twilight's attention does sound like a premise you can do a lot with. I've done some thinking, and I've come to the conclusion that the problem has gotta be that Owlicious just isn't a character. He's an owl who doesn't talk or really even emote much. I think the appeal of having a rivalry between two characters is to see how both characters react to each other. If Owlicious caught onto Spike's antics and decided to keep escalating the conflict, it could have led to more interesting and comedic scenes. The slow pacing and lack of comedy means that the episode feels a little more depressing than it probably wants to be. I can see what they're going for by having Twilight be bad at communicating her appreciation for Spike, but it doesn't really work as well as I'd hoped. I'd give this episode a 5 out of 10. Despite me focusing on the negatives of this episode, I still don't dislike it at all. It's not that there's a ton of redeeming qualities, but rather that the negatives I pointed out aren't a huge deal to me. Season 1, Episode 25, Party of One. Pinkie Pie invites the main 6 to a party that she's been organising, but they all decline and come up with unconvincing excuses for why they can't go. Pinkie becomes suspicious of this and plans to find out why they've been avoiding her. A little while ago, I mentioned that the purpose of the episode scores was to give you a good idea of my overall thoughts on an episode. I worried there would be episodes where the review would be focused too much on my negative opinions regarding an episode, even though I enjoyed the episode as a whole. This is going to be one of those episodes. Let's get it out the way immediately. This is the bad kind of predictable episode. The reason the main 6 were avoiding Pinkie Pie was because it was her birthday and they'd been planning their own surprise party for her. This is not only immediately obvious as far as twists go, but it gets more obvious as the episode progresses and we even see Twilight ordering a cake. To make matters worse, it hinges on the idea that Pinkie has forgotten when her own birthday is. Pinkie Pie is the enemy of analytical reviews because whenever I criticize anything to do with her, I can immediately tell that all of you will scream, "But she's not supposed to make sense," in the comments. I completely understand that. In fact, in a lot of circumstances, I like that. But it does make reviewing any episode she plays a major role in very difficult. Because what am I supposed to do? Not talk about my thoughts on the plot? I suppose the best way of tackling it is by only bringing it up when I feel like it seriously detriments the episode. And yeah, it does here, which is a shame because there's a lot to like here. Most of the individual scenes are good in a vacuum. I really love the Spike interrogation bit, for example. It's a 7 out of 10. I like it a lot actually. I just can't get over how stupid the premise is. And yes, I understand that's the point of the episode, hence the high score. Only one more episode left until I'm finished with Season 1. Let's do it. Season 1, Episode 26, Best Night Ever. The main 6 attend the Grand Galloping Gala. They all fantasize about having an amazing time, but once they get there, they immediately split up and focus on fulfilling their own goals. Each of these plans goes terribly awry, and they realize that sharing each other's company was all they ever needed. I'm finally at the end of what has felt like a huge journey. This video has used up all of my free time for the last month, so getting to this point feels both exhausting and rewarding. This episode is great. Of course it is. It's not a sprawling storyline with action scenes, villains, and closure, but I think it's incredibly fitting for the ending of the first season. Season 1 as a whole has felt slow in places, mainly focusing on introducing the main characters who will appear throughout the show and really getting us familiar with them. To that end, having a finale that's less worried about the story and more so on the characters is the only way this season could have realistically ended. My favorite thing about the episode is the message. In the grand scheme of things, we're still right at the beginning of the show. We've seen the growing pains of the main six's friendship all the way through the season, so this, to me, feels like the moment that they're really cemented as a proper friend group. Previously, there was a lot of arguing and reluctance between the characters. It's one of the biggest driving factors of every episode's conflict. Even in this episode, they have a terrible time at the gala because they immediately separated. This episode and season ends on a scene where they run away from the party and learn that being together was what really mattered. As for the execution, it's all pretty good. Everything here works well enough, but outside of the theming and message, none of it's the best we'll ever see from the show. In that way, it's all too fitting an end for the season. I'll give the episode an 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed myself with this one. Overall thoughts. Season 1 of Friendship is Magic is uneven. The season hosts some of my favourite episodes in the entire franchise, but also some of my least favourites. I'm honestly not sure how I've come across in this video. At times, I've worried I'm too harsh. Other times, I'm worried I'm too generous. When I went into Friendship is Magic for the first time, I honestly didn't know all that much about it. The cultural zeitgeist completely passed me by, and I willfully ignored it. I regret that a lot. I've come to really enjoy the season, and because of my ignorance, I still don't really know what the fandom's opinion of these episodes are. That's the thing that makes this video both so exciting and so terrifying. I've been given my honest, non-sugar-coated thoughts for every single one of these episodes. I hope that if you disagree with my opinions, that I've at least done a good job of clarifying my point of view. The worst thing that could possibly happen is for all of you to hate me just because I independently came to a different conclusion on an episode than the Fandom Council elders collectively agreed upon all those years ago when it first aired. To me, that's the whole point of this video, is to see what someone who's going in with a fresh pair of eyes actually thinks. I'm not going to give a numbered score to the season. I'm just going to say that I enjoyed my time rewatching it a lot, even the parts that I was a bit more critical towards. Anyway, if you've made it to this point, then I think it's pretty safe to say you're interested enough in what I have to say that you'll want to see part 2 of this video, where I review every episode of season 2. Yes, I am very interested in making that video. However, this was such a big undertaking that I won't make any promises for when it will be out. That's exactly why you should subscribe, so that you can be notified when it does. This channel is very much under construction. I tried my hardest to make the video as good as possible, but a lot of this is still held together with duct tape and glue. Let me know if you've liked the format of this video. I liked the idea of including the short recaps because not all of you will remember every episode by name, so I felt it was a good way of making sure everyone was on the same page. But I also wanted to make sure my actual insight and critique was much longer than the recap. I think the solution I came up with was a good one, but I'm absolutely willing to hear everyone's thoughts in the comments. Same goes for the numerical scores. I've already given my reasoning for them, but I wonder if you think their inclusion adds to the video or not. As I've mentioned numerous times by now, I really do not know what everyone's opinions on these episodes or the season are. Please feel free to use the comment section to discuss your thoughts on these episodes. What are some of your favorite and least favorites this season? I'm not even saying this for engagement bait, I genuinely want to know. That's pretty much one of the biggest reasons I made the channel. I'd love to make some friends in the fandom, but in real life I'm very introverted, so doing these kinds of insanely high effort projects is the best idea I've got for reaching out. Check the links in the description if you'd like to see where else you can find me online. I'm gonna end it here before the conclusion starts to drag out for too long. Thank you very much for watching my video. It means a lot to me.